שיוויתי השם ונגדי תמיד, 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 ונגדי תמיד. שיוויתי השם ונגדי תמיד.
Welcome to Spirit of the Torah. This is our episode on Parshat Noach, a portion of the Torah that really tells us a fascinating story about somebody who is different to everybody around him. Everyone else, we're told, is going to be wiped out by the flood, but Noach and his family are going to be saved. And right in the very first verse of the Parsha, we actually have the implications of that quite troubling state of affairs already surfaced. We're told, Ele Toldot Noach, these are the generations of Noach. Noach ish tzaddik. Noach was a righteous man. Tamim haya b'doratav. He was perfect or blameless or pure in his generation. Et Elohim hitalech Noach. Noach walked with God. So right from this very first verse, this person, Noach, who, if we know the story, we know again, he's going to be saved and his family, but everyone else is going to be killed by the flood. We're told, why is that the case? We're told there's something special and different about him because he is ish tzaddik tamim haya b'doratav. He's a righteous person, a tzaddik, pure or perfect or blameless tamim in his generation. And we have a very famous comment by our French medieval commentator Rashi, based on a comment in the Talmud and Tractate Sanhedrin. And Rashi picks up on some of the questions that we might ourselves be asking when we read this verse at the beginning of this very troubling story. And Rashi comments that the phrase that he was pure or perfect in his generation can be interpreted either to Noach's credit or actually to his discredit. To his credit, because it might mean that even though he lived in a generation that were so corrupt that they apparently deserved to be wiped out by the divine, even though he lived surrounded by such terrible people, he managed to still be a tzaddik, a righteous person. On the other hand, Rashi says, we might understand it to his discredit, meaning that the verse is actually saying he's only righteous in comparison to his generation. And Rashi says, if he would have lived in the generation of Abraham Avinu, he would have been considered as of no importance. And that's very important because actually the source that Rashi seems to be taking this teaching from doesn't explicitly mention Abraham, but Rashi himself seems to be inserting that because he is making a comparison between two people who lived through a divine threat of mass punishment. What does Abraham do when God says, by the way, Abraham, I just want to tell you, I am going to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain because they are so corrupted. Famously, in chapter 18 of Bereshit, of Genesis, Abraham argues with God, right? He negotiates, tries to stop God doing what God said God wants to do. Noach, on the other hand, when God says, I want you to build an ark for you and your family because everyone else is going to be wiped out, Noach doesn't even speak in response to God. He simply does what he is told. So these are two very different models of what it might mean to be a righteous person. And what Rashi is doing for us, which is just amazing, what our rabbis often do for us, is he's bringing multiple perspectives at the same time. He's saying, on the one hand, maybe being a tzaddik, a righteous person, is an absolute quality, and Noach just has it. And even though he's surrounded by terrible people, he is just this absolute diamond. On the other hand, maybe it depends who you're surrounded by and how you relate to them and what you do in relationship to them. And what I'd like to do now is explore how the tzaddik is talked about in our mystical tradition particularly, and what its relevance is for us. Because actually we're told in multiple sources that all of us are potential tzaddikim. All of us are potential righteous people. So it's not some category that belongs to someone else out there, someone who's some kind of superhuman, although that is actually one way it is sometimes talked about, and that can sometimes be misleading or disheartening for the rest of us mere human beings. But actually we have a lot of sources which say this is actually us at our fullest potential, that every single one of us is a tzaddik in waiting or a tzaddik in process. And I think one of the reasons that people do not feel comfortable thinking about themselves as a tzaddik because obviously we all make lots of mistakes all the time. We all know how very flawed we all are. maybe particularly at this time of year when we've just had Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, thinking a lot about what we want to make teshuvah, what we want to fix and return from and repent for in our lives. But actually, a verse in Proverbs chapter 24 says, 7 times the tzaddik, the righteous person, falls and gets up, whereas the wicked are tripped by one misfortune. So in other words, the difference between the tzaddik and the rasha, according to this verse, the tzaddik and the wicked person, is not actually what they do. It's actually how they respond to what they do. It's what they do after what they do. The tzaddik is somebody who falls and gets up 7 times, whereas the wicked, they fall and they stay down. They don't get up. And of course, 7 is a very significant number for us, especially in Kabbalah. 7 is the number of the Sefirot, which manifests fully in this world. The 7 lower Sefirot. What is a Sefirah? A Sefirah is a quality of the divine and also a human character trait. You can also think of it as a window through which divine energy comes into the world. In this context, it's really helpful to think of it as a character trait. And the verse can be understood and is understood by the Kabbalists as saying, the righteous person is somebody who fails with every single one of their emotions or character traits. And each time they do, they pick themselves up, they learn from it, they do what they have to do to fix and repair it, and they keep growing. Whereas a wicked person, again, is somebody who stays down, who does not get up and keep growing from their mistakes. So being a tzaddik, being a righteous person is definitely not about being perfect. And it's definitely not about never making mistakes. That's clear and obvious from that verse. Also from the story of Joseph. As Joseph is called by our ancient sages and then the Kabbalists, Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the righteous. He's actually the paradigm of what it means to be tzaddik according to Kabbalah. And we discussed his story in the Rosh Hashanah episode. You may remember we talked about it from one angle. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more from a different angle now, which is when Joseph is being tempted in the house of Potiphar, the wealthy Egyptian he's a slave in. He's being tempted by the wife of Potiphar, a woman who tries desperately to seduce him at all hours of the day, wearing different clothing and so on. When we read the story in the Torah itself, it seems like Joseph passed the test with flying colors. Very, very interestingly. The rabbis don't want us to think that. The rabbis add in the Talmud that actually he has mixed intentions, that he might well have intentions to actually let himself be seduced or even to seduce her, and that he only just scrapes through the test literally by his fingernails, hanging on by his fingernails. So the image we might have of a tzaddik, of someone perfect, who never makes mistakes, who never has bad intentions, who always passes every test with flying colors, is simply not true. It's not authentic to our tradition whatsoever. Maybe it came from other religions, other traditions, and got superimposed somehow, but we do not have a tradition of tzaddikim being like that in our ancient texts. And in fact, the Zohar says it was this episode with Mrs. Potiphar through which Joseph became the embodiment of the quality of tzaddik, of yesod, foundation, integrity, faithfulness in the world. He brings that quality into the world in a whole new way, according to the Zohar, in this moment when he passed that test. But again, he didn't pass the test with flying colors. He partially fails it. And again, he only just manages to hold on, scraping his fingernails to pass it to the extent that he does. Now, what does it mean that he becomes the embodiment of that quality? Well, the Zohar says he becomes a conduit. And this is how tzaddik is usually understood in many Kabbalistic sources. A tzaddik is somebody who is a channel, a tzinor, a pipe, a conduit through which life can flow. Why is that? How is that? It's because if we have proven our integrity in the way that Joseph did in that test, and again, he did it in a messy human way that we can all relate to because we all mess up all the time, but he just about held on and did the right thing. If we can have the kind of integrity that Joseph did then, you get to be, if you can do that, a channel for life to flow through you, because life can trust you to be a vessel and you can trust yourself to be a vessel for life. And what happens is, we're told in Kabbalah, life flows through that quality of tzaddik or yesod, which is foundation or integrity, and it waters the soil of life, or it fills the well of life. One beautiful image used in the Zohar is that it turns a barren hole, which has no life in it, into a beautiful bubbling well, overflowing with life force. So if we can be trusted with life flowing through us, again, if we can trust ourselves, the universe can trust us, then life will flow through us and it will lead to yet more life. This quality of Yesod I've mentioned, which is often connected to tzaddik, foundation or integrity, it's also mapped onto the male genitalia. And so we can understand, first of all, in the context of Joseph's test, it makes a lot of sense. And also we can understand the role of this integrity is to plant a seed for life, or again, to be a channel or a conduit for life to flow through it, to allow new life to emerge. And how does it emerge? Where does it emerge? That is in the final quality of the tree of life, the bottom quality, the lowest quality, which is called Malchut or Shekhinah, which is manifestation, which is life as we know it. So if we allow ourselves to be faithful and have integrity, we get to be somebody who enables life, who facilitates life. Again, that's Malchut or Shekhinah, the flourishing of manifestation. And turning now to the Hasidic tradition, which takes Kabbalah and tries to make it more accessible to the Jewish masses, Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic tradition, he said that a tzaddik is somebody who enjoys and takes pleasure in serving God, which is a fascinating teaching because so often in Jewish tradition and in many other religions, we see that serving God is associated with denying the body, with asceticism, with fasting. Even if you're in medieval Germany and you're part of a group called the Hasidei Ashkenaz, rolling around in the snow to afflict the body that way, and so on. But actually, the Baal Shem Tov, part of the revolution that he was ushering in, was saying, no, we have neglected the body too long, we have despised the body too long, we have looked down on the body, and actually, what we need to do is integrate the body into our service of the divine. This, he said, is actually part of the redemption. Part of the redemption of the whole world is us re-embracing and reintegrating the physical into our wholesome divine service. In other words, everything we do in a wholesome way. So again, instead of looking at the body as lowly and disgusting and an object, therefore, of shame and revulsion and guilt, rather to include it in our whole selves and in being the best people that we can be. And this is also related to his philosophy of how Judaism should be practiced in another way too, because he said, just as when a man and a woman want to create new life, there has to be desire, which is going to manifest on a biological level in the male genital organ. Sorry to be so explicit, but otherwise it won't be possible to create new life. And we, of course, are created in the image of God. Kabbalah understands that our physical bodies are a reflection of a deep spiritual truth. Everything below is a reflection of something above and vice versa. So if this is the case for physical union, that it only leads to creating new life if there is desire, then he says it's the same with our spiritual practice. He says if you want to pray or do anything else to serve God or any kind of spiritual growth, it's only going to work if there's desire and enjoyment and pleasure involved. Otherwise, it's just not going to yield any fruit. It's just not going to lead to new life. So part of what made the Baal Shem Tov so revolutionary and so threatening to much of the rabbinic establishment was he is saying there's no point doing Judaism in a rote manner. There's no point opening up the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, and simply doing what it tells you to do because it tells you to do it. It says it has to be a practice that you enjoy to be meaningful. Otherwise, it won't lead to any life happening from it. It will be a dead practice, essentially. Now, I mentioned earlier on this idea that we're all tzaddikim, we're all righteous people, at least in potential. And the Baal Shem Tov and his students talk about this. First of all, it's an idea brought in the Mishnah and Sanhedrin. And what we see is, as the Hasidic movement takes root and spreads to more and more people and places throughout Eastern Europe, there's a spectrum of different ways that people understand what a tzaddik is. Because the Baal Shem Tov and his students and their students were seen by others as tzaddikim, as righteous ones. And there's a very broad spectrum of what that means in different places at different times throughout the Hasidic movement, throughout Eastern Europe. In some places, people thought that tzaddik, the leader of their community, their rebbe, really had supernatural powers and that you could go to the tzaddik and they could fix all your problems for you and so on. In other places, the tzaddik, the rebbe, was somebody who could give you great advice and empathy and guidance because he himself or they themselves were a broken human being just like you, imperfect and struggling just like you. So we see different people and different communities needed a different model of leadership at different times. One idea we see come up in Kabbalah and then again in the Hasidic movement is the tzaddik hador. That is one tzaddik, one righteous person who somehow includes the souls of everyone in their generation and raises them all up. He's doing the spiritual work on behalf of everyone. Now, even according to people who bring that model, it's not that he does it all on his own. It's not that we are irrelevant and don't do anything, but there is a certain degree to which that person is special and unlike the rest of us. Whereas the early Hasidic master known as the Ma'or Einayim, the light of the eyes, the Shenobler Rebbe, and himself a student of the Baal Shem Tov, and a very important window for us into early Hasidic ideas, he says that actually we all need to take responsibility onto ourselves for being tzaddikim. That we live in a broken world where there's no such thing as one person who's going to do all the work for the rest of us and lift all the rest of us up, but rather we all need to play our role. By the way, he says the same thing about the idea of the Messiah. He says, in the name of his teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, he says, we all have a little piece of the Messiah inside us. We all have a little portion of the redemption, and we need to work on our own portion. So it's not that we need to wait for someone else, the tzaddik or the Mashiach, the Messiah, to do it for us. We each need to work on our portion, raise up our little piece of our best self and of the best possible world that the world can be. And that is how the world is going to improve. So you see how these ideas can be used both to disempower people, to say, no, don't worry about it, leave it all up to the tzaddik or the Messiah and they'll do it all for you. Or they can actually be used to empower us, to say, you can be so much more than you are now. We all have so much greater potential to be more than we are now. Can we set our goals higher for ourselves? Can we set the bar higher, be better people than we are now? I believe these teachings can be a fantastic resource, not just for generally inspiring us, but actually giving us specific guidance on how to do that. So here's a practice on being more of a tzaddik. And goes back to that teaching I mentioned of the Baal Shem Tov on pleasure. He says that a tzaddik is somebody who enjoys serving God, meaning actually they experience more pleasure in everything they do. So the practice is like this. Sit calmly, let yourself settle by noticing what's going on inside yourself. Try to bring compassionate awareness to whatever you're noticing going on inside yourself, whether it's physical sensations, emotions, thoughts. Try and notice them with compassion. Gradually let yourself settle. If you want, you can use one particular anchor, one object for your attention to settle on, to help your thoughts, your awareness settle down, just paying attention to one place in your body or one experience as your breath. And after you've been doing this for a few minutes, open to the possibility of experiencing pleasure in the moment. And you might be in a state where this is very easy and pleasure is very forthcoming and obvious, but you might be in a state where it is not. It's going to be different every time we do the exercise. So you might want to invite yourself very gently to inquire, is pleasure present? Could pleasure be present? Even if I'm experiencing some kind of physical or emotional pain or discomfort at the moment, is there a way in which I can actually find enjoyment in that experience? And that's how the practice might play out in a meditation practice. But of course, it could also play out in real life. I could be standing in line at the bank or the supermarket, or I could be sitting in a traffic jam or on an uncomfortably full commuter train or bus, and I can be having a certain amount of resistance and discomfort that I'm noticing arise inside me. And at the same time, I can try this practice. I can introduce the question, is there a way that I can find pleasure or enjoyment in this moment? And I would suggest trying this practice not only in such challenging moments, but also in moments when it's easier, being conscious of our ability to feel pleasure, to enjoy the moment, to enjoy the phenomena of being alive as we go through our day-to-day lives. Because again, the Baal Shem Tov was teaching, tzaddik is someone who feels enjoyment and pleasure in serving the divine. And he also says that ultimately everything we do can be an act of serving the divine. So that's really where we're headed. That's the goal that we can be directing ourselves towards. So may it be a good week for you and your families. May we hear good news for our people here in Israel and around the world. And may we open to the pleasure of being alive and the pleasure of being a vessel and a conduit for life to flow through us, for us to be those who plant seeds for even greater, more beautiful manifestations of life to occur. Shabbat shalom.